As cliched as it sounds, obviously, in the hope of helping patients or helping the public, I went for the interviews and I was hired by Pfizer as a medical advisor.
Dr. Vicknesh is currently the healthcare and medical affairs consultant at Zero Range Healthcare. He has a career in the pharma industry that spans over 17 years in various positions, including being the medical director.
Was I getting bored with being a general practitioner?
And when I look at them, I just think that, oh my God, you guys have just betrayed the profession. And going to pharma is akin to going to the dark side of medicine.
Right. I went to mom and told her that, I'm leaving practice and joining the pharmaceutical industry. My mother literally broke down and cried. One of the GPs sitting next to me, he literally told me, he said, haven't you wasted your parents' money, right? For them educating you to be a doctor and you're now doing this. So I think these are the two primary areas for doctors to get into in pharma.
Do any of these roles require APC? So what are pharma companies looking for when they hire doctors?
And maybe one other element that is important for a doctor who would like to come into industry is, you just can't be a medical director for a company overnight.
What is the salary earning potential of someone who gets into pharma?
Join Disruptive Doctors.
I'm Dr. Selina, your host and co-founder of Disruptive Doctors. At Disruptive Doctors, we're building a platform to help doctors like you impact healthcare differently. In Postcall, we dive into the untold stories of doctors who are breaking the mold, trailblazers who are redefining what it means to be a doctor. This is Postcall Beyond the White Coat.
Welcome to another episode of Postcall Beyond the White Coat. Recently, during our Doctors Impacting Healthcare Differently conference, a senior doctor asked me a very important question. She asked, what's the prospect for senior doctors who have been in GP practice for a very long time? What else can they do if they want to leave the GP practice? Now, I think this is a question that a lot of senior doctors face as they contemplate the next chapter of their careers. So today, I'm excited to have Dr. Vicknesh Velupillai with us, who has navigated this very journey from starting as a medical officer in the government sector to spending over a decade in the GP practice and then making a significant leap into the pharmaceutical industry. As doctors, I think we often find ourselves at crossroads wondering if there's more to our careers beyond clinical practice. Hi, Dr. Vicknesh.
Hi, Selina.
Welcome to our podcast.
Most welcome and thanks for having me on this podcast.
What was your reason getting into medicine?
I guess as cliched as it sounds, obviously, in the hope of helping patients or helping the public, right, from a healthcare perspective. I also think that it was very interesting because I have always found the human body to be quite an enigma, actually, right? Everything sort of just fits into place. So I guess the want to know more to a certain extent drove me there. And I guess my parents led me down that path. So that's basically why I'm in medicine. Yeah.
Okay, so you graduated, you came back, you worked in KKM for a while. What was your experience like back then?
Yeah. So I think, as per what we know and still happening today is once you qualify and you come back, you're supposed to work for the government, i.e. The Ministry of Health, or KKM. Of course, during my time, many years ago, it was 1 year of housemanship and 3 years of being a medical officer. And then you could choose to leave the service because then you'd have completed your compulsory service. I understand today it may be a little bit different. But having said that, I think that part of my career was very important, especially now when I reflect in hindsight. Hospital practice is really important. It is really a stepping stone, I feel, for doctors carry on in practice. Of course, some doctors decide that, they're becoming specialists eventually. But even for someone like me who is in pharmaceuticals or was in pharmaceuticals, I found that hospital practice really gave me a bit of an edge, when it came to treatment, treatment paradigm, working with patients, working in a hospital setting with other doctors, nurses, etc. So I do consider the time I spent in hospital very important, and I can't emphasize it more to doctors qualifying today that do try to spend that time in hospital that you're supposed to, because it sort of comes back to you later on, and I guess it does help in the future, right? So yeah, so that was my hospital practice, Selina, before moving on to become a GP. Yeah.
What made you decide to quit government service and go into the private sector?
So I guess I get that question all the time too. Basically, I think the reasons were multifactorial, right? The probably the need. I didn't want to see a change, though, as I have to admit, I did like hospital practice, but I also won't hide the fact that there were some amount of financial implications as well, right? Having been put through medical college, there were loans, etc., right? And this is me just being forthcoming. So I guess at some point I had to make that decision from a financial perspective, from a career perspective, that I needed something different. So I think that would probably be the main reason, or the main two reasons as to why I decided to come out of the government side. Yeah.
At that time, what were the options other than just a GP practice? Were there any other options?
So at that point in time, the reason for why I too went into a GP practice was someone I knew had actually offered me a chance to join them, in their practice. And I wasn't really thinking very much at that point. As I said, I thought probably the natural transition for me would be, to obviously continue practicing as a doctor, and probably in the arena of general practice, everything's considered, in terms of, time, the time spent working. Obviously, that was also a consideration for me, because, in hospital practice, it can get a bit tiring, right? Given the fact that we need to do call, etc., and all that. So I was looking for a change in terms of the timing, as I mentioned earlier, the financial prospect, as well as probably, opening my eyes, to a different form of healthcare. Of course, there were other options at that time. You could have gone and worked in a private hospital, even as a medical officer, working in the outpatient or in the emergency. But because someone gave me the opportunity to work with them, in a general practice, I moved into general practice. Yeah.
What was it like moving from public healthcare sector into the general practice side, the private sector? What was the change you noticed?
Yeah, I think, first of all, as I said, I think the type of work that you do, you're going from a hospital practice, working by the bedside, working with a team of nurses, working with your other counterparts, working in a unit. You go straight to, working almost on your own, albeit obviously there are nurses in a GP practice, but you're sitting in a room, attending to patients. Again, the nature of the practice, right? So while in hospital and it's hospital medicine, I was basically in hospital attached to the medical unit, and this was really good experience because I was seeing all sorts of diseases, from things like dengue down to diabetes and heart disease. Now, when you transition into a general practice, obviously you're more into primary care and you're looking at some of the more, I don't want to say lighter conditions, but things like fever, cough, flu, obviously the occasional wound, accident, injury. So I guess, the mindset then needs to change. So I guess the change is going from hospital medicine to general practice is, you tend to be involved in a very more personalized setting, right? And having to understand primary care much better, right? So that, I guess, is some difference, you know.
Okay, so you were in GP practice for 10 years.
Yeah.
So, okay, most doctors, 10 years in GP practice, I think they would have gotten quite comfortable. They would have gotten the flow and, the work would be quite predictable. So what made you decide to lead to pharmaceutical?
Okay. Yeah. So, when while I was in GP practice, I also did something called occupational health, right? Occupational health is a course. Actually, I did a licentiate from the Royal College of Surgeons, Ireland, because while I was in GP practice, I was looking for what else could I do, right? And I think if you speak to general practitioners today, they would tell you they would also try to find a niche. And I was looking for a niche and, found out, right, that there was this branch which is called occupational health. Occupational health essentially is about dealing with literally that, right? The factory, for example, when someone works in a factory, right? What are the elements they may or may not get exposed to? What sort of injuries? Even people who sit in an office all day, you're not sitting well enough, you end up with back problems. But within a factory, especially working with chemicals, etc. So I went down that road, Selina, thinking that maybe, that would be something I would do. So I actually got my licentiate, was a registered occupational health doctor, and thought, okay, maybe this would be the way I would go. Maybe, I'd branch out doing this from a private perspective or, join other doctors. But then, something actually happened, right? Because someone actually spoke to me and told me about the pharmaceutical industry, right? And, actually, I was working in JB, in GP practice before I came to KL. And while I was trying to come back, I knew about this and, tried to venture into pharmaceuticals, but it didn't work at that point. Now, while I was in GP practice in KL, and after I done the occupational health course, and thought, I was going this way. What was very interesting was, as we sit in a general practice, we get the pharmaceutical medical representatives coming in to talk about the medicine from the various companies. So it just turned out that I used to speak to them, and then I had a couple of reps coming in from Pfizer who we started chatting about the medicines that they were actually promoting. And for some reason, the conversation went from there to, doctor, there are actually positions. There's currently a position in Pfizer for a medical doctor to come in, as a medical advisor. Would you be keen? And so they told me how to go about it, and I applied into Pfizer, right? Then, right? And well, I managed actually, long story short, I went to the interviews and I was hired by Pfizer as a medical advisor. Now, I think your question initially also was why, right? I did reflect back. So as I told you, I went down this occupational health road, but I was also reflecting on some of my strengths, right? Uh, and I guess this is really important advice for doctors out there today as well. Reflect on your strengths. So while you may be in medicine, I think there are some of you who may be very good from an IT perspective, or some doctors who may be very good from different perspectives. They may know finance very well, AI today, etc. But I reflected on one of my strengths, which was actually communication, right? I always felt that I was someone who would like to, talk, teach, etc. So I thought, okay, where could I apply this? And pharma, among other things, is one area where communication, even till today, I sort of teach this, is really important. So,
What made you decide to reflect on your strengths? I mean, it's not something random people would do,
sure. Yeah.
let alone doctors.
Yeah, it's true. But I guess when you are looking around, right? So having been in GP practice and thinking of doing occupational health, there was something still sort of rumbling within my insides, right? Saying that, hey, is this it or is this something else, right? I think we all reflect at different points in our life, right? As to, whether it be from a personal or professional perspective. So are we going down that right path, right? And I think what triggered it off was the fact that I had these medical reps actually come in and talk to me about this, right? And I guess after they spoke, I thought, right? And again, spoke to a couple of people whom I knew. And at that point in time, Selina, not many doctors in pharma, I would think, right? I mean, they were already there, but not many. So that's when I reflected on, okay, I could do this. I like communicating. I would like to probably get out there and meet people. Was I getting bored with being a general practitioner? Maybe to a certain extent, yeah. But the trigger was there, right? Personally, I believe this again, right place, right time, right? Things happen, yeah. So right place.
And so, wait, this job application to Pfizer was your first attempt into
No, I think it was something like my third attempt because, as I said, when I moved from Johor Bahru to KL, someone had actually told me about this, and I did apply to at least two companies then, and it didn't work, right? It sort of didn't work out at that point in time, so that's when I decided to continue as a general practitioner, in a group practice in KL, right? So it wasn't right. So I think it would be something like my third attempt into pharma and I guess it worked. Yeah.
so
Pfizer.
that time is a charm. What do you think made it successful this time?
So again, I guess it sort of worked both ways. I guess whenever you're applying into a company, whether it's pharma or anything, something's got to click, right? Because, people having gone for 10, 15 interviews, then some people just go for two interviews and bang, something's got to click. But maybe I was a little bit better prepared, having gone or understood the industry better. I think, again, an important point, right? It's really important to understand the industry you're going into, number one. Number two, it's even more important to know the company you're applying into, right? To understand the background. And number three, I guess, is, communicating, right? Accordingly, right? So a couple of these factors, I think, may have worked in my favor. Not to mention, as I said, right time, right place, right? And right person hiring you, right? So the stars aligned, yeah, Selina. Yeah.
So, okay, now you've done 10 years of GP practice and now you're moving into corporate. What were the challenges? Because it's clearly a very, very different field.
Yes. Yes. So it was very challenging initially because, like I said, going from hospital practice to GP practice was a mindset change to begin with, but it was all practicing across the board, working with patients. Now, once you take that leap into pharma, number one, obviously the patients, I think they physically disappear. Okay. If you know what I mean, right? You don't have that physical patient in front of you. However, what you're doing for pharmaceuticals is the patient is still there because at the end of the day, the patient is the final recipient of the medicines that the company makes, right? So the physical patient disappeared and, looking at treatment across the board, management across the board for a whole host of disease, all that went, right? Because now you have to be focused on the portfolio that the company carries, right? Number one. Number two, you have to speak, in a way about the evidence and the science of the medicines that the company makes and the associated disease, right? And you probably have to go down that path, right? Obviously, as doctors, we think about treatment in general, but the need to be even more focused now on what the company does, right? And that's number one. Number two is, you asked me this question earlier about clinics and working in a clinics about their revenue, right? Now you're in a pharma company, and obviously it's a company, right? That also looks at revenue and sales targets, albeit medical side, we don't directly look at sales targets. However, you have to be cognizant of the fact that, you're in this company and, revenue targets have to be met. But how do you deal with it then from the medical side? Yeah. So I think all of this, so the challenge is the physical patient disappearing, looking right across the board in terms of treating patients down to being very focused on, certain medicines, certain disease areas. The environment is different, right? Because now you're working with corporate people, right? You're working with marketeers. You probably have to work with the sales group, etc. Unlike, hospital, you're working with nurses, etc. So thinking needed to change, focus needed to change. It took a bit of time because I was getting feedback initially about the need to be a little bit more focused, etc. On how I represent the medicines, the disease area, and obviously the company, right? But it worked. I mean, I didn't see it as much of a challenge, but the challenges were there initially, right? But I guess it worked out because I found the work very interesting. Yeah.
So earlier you just mentioned that you were receiving feedback about how you're representing the company and all. What were those feedbacks?
Okay, so first of all, let me put it in perspective. It wasn't very negative in any way. I guess the feedback was more about trying to apply myself, or become more focused around the medicines that the company was actually making, and try to push the science around or talk about that science. You see, when we come from a practice, right, where we are generally speaking right across the board, working with diseases right across the board. Here, you really need to be focused. So sometimes your your general practice element sort of kicks in, right? What else are we thinking about? So I guess that was the feedback. I wasn't, so again, putting things to perspective, I wasn't running down the company or running out any of the medicines. It was just the thing to be focused and be on the right track, right? And this was the feedback I was getting, both from my medical superiors as well as even from the commercial team. Yeah. So then you sort of start moving yourself in that right direction with guidance, obviously.
Like, what do you see as like the most common challenge you would see a young doctor who is transitioning into pharmaceutical? What do you see the most glaring challenge for them?
Yeah. As I said, I think it comes from the challenge, sorry, that I experienced as well in terms of getting more focused, understanding what. First of all, as I said, even when you're going for the interview, you need to understand the company and the industry, right? So I think when you start off, or when a doctor starts off, these are important areas. Number one, right, about understanding the industry and more importantly, understanding the company. Then understanding the industry comes in. Number two is um, you need to be, I keep using the word focus, but that's basically it, right? How do you focus yourself on the science, right, around that medicine? Basically, having, coming in and getting a grip of the knowledge, right, around a certain medicine. So, for example, if new doctors are coming and applying into the company or industry, right? One piece of advice I would give is know the pipeline of that company well, right? All these companies. So if you're coming in for an interview, if you have that knowledge at the back of your mind, you would understand. And then this becomes even more obvious when you join a company or you're taken in, right? The ability to understand the pipeline, the clinical research. Yes, so that's another area. So while we're in practice, we don't think that much about clinical research. The minute you put your foot into the industry, clinical research becomes very important. Different phases, drug development, drug discovery, this is another area that's important. So again, for doctors who want to get into the industry, sort of familiarize yourself with these elements, right, of clinical research, right? Especially drug discovery, drug development, and subsequently different phases of clinical research. I think these are the top line things, Selina. Of course, it goes a bit deeper, right? For doctors, but if you're applying, know the industry, know the company, know the pipeline, understand certain elements of the industry.
Can you elaborate on the pipeline?
Okay, so I think when you go online, for example, if you were to Google any company, you would go into, obviously they would talk about the company and the history, what the company stands for, and then the product portfolio, etc. And invariably, companies do have a section on the pipeline. Now, what the pipeline is the companies are doing R&D, research and development for their portfolio. So when we say the portfolio, for example, medicines to treat diabetes, right? Now, if the company is focused on diabetes, they would actually be looking at conceptual research. That means the initial research on, different types of compounds that could work for diabetes, right? And this is probably done in a lab. And then they would then go on to obviously doing, if they find a compound that works at a lab level, then they would start doing the different tests, right? And it comes down to research in human beings, right? So you've got your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So the pipeline actually are these different compounds that the company has either developed on their own or maybe have, medicines by maybe acquiring another company or buying it from another company, etc. So all these medicines then fall into the pipeline of the company. So as I said, you would have, and some of them would be very early, conceptual phase, early phase, and then they go on right down to your medicines that have gone through all these trials, and have been finally you come to the point where medicine is done or trial is done on a medicine or a study in a big group of patients, and you found that it is safe, the medicine is safe, and it works, and therefore it's put up for approval by the regulatory authorities, right, in the country. So pipeline is basically medicines that a company would work on in terms of developing it, right down to the trials for a portfolio the company works on. Example, diabetes or hypertension. Yeah.
So portfolio, would that mean the disease or the products?
Essentially, it's both. It's disease and the products, right? So, for example, many companies today are working on medicines, oncology, or cancer, right? So, it's obviously the disease area. And within the disease area, there may be certain areas to focus on. So, for example, if it's cancer, it could be lung cancer or breast cancer. And in tandem, you're looking for products, compounds, whether it be, as I mentioned earlier, from within your own laboratories or within your own labs, to sort of treat these diseases, or whether you're looking outside, right? So yeah, so to answer your question, it's both disease and the products themselves, right?
Okay, so if it's say I'm a doctor, I've been practicing, and I want to get into pharma, should I choose companies where, say, I have interest in oncology? Should I go and look for a pharma company that is targeting or has a portfolio in oncology, or should I just spray and try all?
I guess you could do both, lah, but I think that it probably, if you have your background in oncology. So, for example, if you for a doctor in Malaysia, if you work in the National Cancer Institute here, and you've been obviously you've been learning about the different cancers and the treatment paradigms. Yes, I think today, as I said, most companies have an oncology portfolio, so you could look at applying it to those companies. That would give you an edge over someone who probably does not have that, right? Because the science around oncology can be quite complex, right? So I think yes, I would think that if you have that background in a certain disease, right? For example, if you worked on diabetes, and you would go out and look for a company that's portfolio is primarily diabetes, it would give you an edge. But I guess when companies do hire in, this gives you an edge, but it's not, not foolproof, lah. In the sense that other factors also do play a part.
So, what are pharma companies looking for when they hire doctors?
Okay, I guess at the end of the day, it's been changing over time. But to me, maybe I want to speak about this from my perspective, because I was a hiring manager at one point, right? I think obviously the first thing is for doctors is, and they probably have it, is the science background. Yeah. So when if you're a doctor, it's understood that you have a scientific background to be able to understand the basics of the disease, because the disease, obviously understanding a disease is important, and doctors have that scientific background. So scientific background is the first thing you would or you should have. In today's environment, I guess understanding about the industry, which is why I'm speaking for doctors who would like to apply into the industry. I think a lot of doctors today, they may be familiar with the common names of the companies, but how much do you know about that company? So for me, one of the questions I would ask is, okay, you're hiring into this company. What do you know about the company, right? I mean, you don't have to tell me when it was founded, but just give me a general sense of, okay, your company essentially focuses on, oncology or diabetes. These are some of the medicines you have. So I think that's number two, right? Understanding the company or knowing the company that you're going to work with, right? Number three is, I think, being understanding, scientific literature. That would help, right? So you can get on to some of these peer-reviewed journals like the British Medical Journal or the New England. Go and read some journals, right, to understand how this is, because pharma companies, a lot of our evidence or initial evidence is based on clinical research or clinical studies. Now, exhibiting that you understand this would also give you an edge, right? Right. And it would be even more good if you knew a company was, doing oncology and you happen to read some research around oncology, right? The fourth thing I think is, for me, always has been communication, right? How you communicate. So I know this is very broad, when we talk about communication, but I think presenting yourself in a fashion that, this is how I could speak. And you probably need to understand that the audience that from a pharmaceutical perspective you would be speaking to would be doctors, right? Primarily doctors. And of course, today, pharma, we speak to pharmacists, we speak to other allied healthcare people, even government, right? Ministry of Health, to talk about our medicines and the science behind it. So the ability to communicate, number one, communicate ordinarily, meaning that I guess it's PR. And number two, to be able to communicate medically, right? So if you have clinical papers in front of you, when you go and communicate a clinical paper to a doctor, you obviously can't be going from A to Z about the clinical paper. Now, how would you communicate clinical paper in a very succinct, clear fashion, right? So I think medical communication, as we call it, is important, right? So I think communication is important. The other thing I think is the ability to work in a team, right? Now, be it aligning yourself with your team internally, i.e., if you're applying into a medical position, the medical team, and the other thing obviously is, working across. Now, I think for doctors who have been in hospital practice, you're always working in a team. I think you sort of get it. But for someone like me who went into GP practice, I lost a little bit of it because, in a GP, I know people say you're working within four walls, but not necessarily. Like, you can actually come out of that room and, spend some time with your nurses, etc. But we tend to lose it a little bit, I think, so I guess your mindset is important in terms of knowing that you're going to be working with a group of people. And maybe one other element that is important for a doctor who would like to come into industry is, gain a little bit of some amount of business sense, right? Because this is something that we really look at. Again, you're working for a company that makes medicines, that distributes and markets these medicines, hence they have revenue. So understanding a little bit about, you don't have to do an MBA overnight, but, getting a sense of revenues are, what does it mean in terms of, profit and loss statements, etc. Just getting a sense, business sense, right? Of how these things work in the pharmaceutical industry. So a couple of things there, Selina, for someone who wants to join. Yeah. Pause.
Okay, so there's actually two things that you brought up that I thought was very interesting. The first one was the communication. Although we think that as doctors we're great communicators, actually I would like to differ. From med school itself, we've been taught to communicate with our patients. Yeah, build rapport, talk to them. Somewhere down the line, you get overworked, you forget what building rapport is and all that. There's also a difference there where patients are coming to you, you're not going to them. So you don't have to, I suppose for doctors in pharma, you have to go down to the ground and talk to the doctors. So you are doing the outreach. How you're doing outreach is a different way of communicating as opposed to just sitting in the clinic and patients are coming to you. No matter how you communicate with them, they're still going to keep coming to you. And secondly is communicating with your peers. I think that's one thing we've not been taught in medical school. And at least here, practicing here in Malaysia, how you speak to your peers, how you speak to your staff, how you speak to your superiors, or how superiors should be speaking to their mentees and people that they are supposed to be training. I think all of that is missing. So do you see this as a missing piece when a doctor applies and go into pharma?
Yes, yes, and no, because why I say yes is to all the points that you just made, right? The way you come, like you said, patients are coming in, and as doctors, we sit back, even in a hospital or in a GP practice and talk to the patients. Whereas here, you need to go out and, first of all, start speaking, communicate, build relationships. All this are required, and that's the no part. Yeah, because yes, you could speak, and as doctors, we do speak to our peers in hospital, etc. But I guess we're discussing. But I think taking all of that out and just coming to the fact that how do you go out there from a pharmaceutical or a pharma perspective and talk to your peer, right? Now that's a little bit different. So here's where I think the advice I can give is you need to be able to balance ordinary PR with medical PR. Okay. Now, ordinary PR is obviously your normal day-to-day conversation, right? When you're having it with anyone, so you walk in and you present yourself in the right way, introduce yourself, and have probably that initial talk with the doctor about how his day's been, or how are things doing, and what's happening in the hospital, etc. But then you need to then pivot to medical communication, as let's not call it medical PR, let's call it medical communication, because you are seeing the doctor or, in a hospital or in a GP practice or a pharmacist for a reason, right? You're there because you're there representing a company, and more importantly, to talk about medicines and the impact on patients, right? So you then you need to pivot to that. And for that to happen, you must be extremely, if not really knowledgeable on the medicines that the company is working on or has out there and the associated disease. See, one of the things I always used to say to my colleagues last time and to those who worked with me is the ability to engage a doctor in a conversation related to the disease first. Right? See, the doctor knows, or the healthcare professional knows, you're from company X and you're here to talk about medicine Y. But the ability to engage the doctor in a disease conversation to begin with, right? So if you're there and doctor understands, if you're working in company X and you all are dealing in medicine Y, now let's just say this medicine was about breast cancer. The medical person must be able to say something about breast cancer, right? So you shouldn't straight away sort of go headlong into talking about the medicine per se. No, that comes, right? But you sort of set the context. You talk about breast cancer, your knowledge about incidence and prevalence of the disease in Malaysia, what the treatment paradigms are, and then you sort of slip into, okay, now let's go to discuss around this medicine and the way it works, etc. So I think the ability to do that and to do that from the very beginning helps, right? So my own personal experience in speaking to sometimes heads of department is the first thing is obviously you do the normal PR and then you listen, right? It's important to listen. I think, I'm also passionate about communication, right? And I think one of the elements you always learn in communication is please listen, right? So listening is really important for two reasons. Number one thing is obviously when you're listening, the doctor says, hey, here's someone who's coming in and you're actually listening. And then the ability to then discuss based on what you just heard and then talk about the medicine, right? That's number one. Number two is listening is also important because, and I say this for those who've been in pharma for a while, because we need to get insight, right? So for example, if you have medicine X out there and you start talking about it and the doctor starts giving you insight, this would be very useful for us to bring back to the company and to bring back to medical, because there may be something there that, could spur more innovation, right? So I think, Selina, to come back, I think the approach, for a pharmaceutical doctor is PR, yes, but more important is medical communication. You have to be very knowledgeable about the disease area you're in and to be able to then fit the medicine that the company makes into that disease area and talk about the scientific evidence around that medicine. Remember, we are evidence-based. So please don't use information you may picked out of the air, etc. Always be evidence-based, right? I think this would, really help.
And because you did mention it's not something you picked out from the air. So if there's something you don't know, do you openly tell them, I'm sorry, I don't know this, let me find out?
Definitely, definitely. Especially, I mean, more often than not, and we get this question all the time. Remember that we are not experts in the disease, right? We have an understanding of the disease, but the doctor you're speaking to or the specialist you're speaking to, you have to give them that, regard that they're the experts in the disease. So, if they happen to have any questions around disease and you really don't know, definitely don't go there. And obviously for the medicine, right? I think as medical, when you're in medical and pharma, yeah, we have the knowledge around the medicine, right? For example, its indications. Obviously, we look at even the safety aspect, and then more importantly, the clinical trials done for those medicines. And our knowledge initially is there, but as the company does more, research on the medicine, we learn more. So every now and then, there's a doctor who's going to say, hey, do you know if it works here or works then? If you don't, then it's better just to say, look, I don't really know, but I can go back and get the information, but I'll be in touch. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you're practicing, there's a lot of pressure. When patients ask you, you must have the answers.
Mhm.
So that would be a switch in mindset.
Yes, it's true. I guess so. It's true. It's true. Yes.
Before we continue, I want to share something very special for our doctors who are listening. If you're a doctor and considering a career shift but don't know where to start, Disruptive Doctors offers a non-clinical Pathfinder workshop. This workshop is designed to help doctors like you explore new opportunities beyond clinical practice and how to choose the right path for you. Whether you're still unsure of whether you should leave medicine or ready to make a change, this workshop is tailored for you. So do check out our annual Disruptive Doctors Conference that happens every August, where like-minded doctors like you come together, share ideas, and impact healthcare differently. Okay, another thing you mentioned, because pharma company, obviously, it's a profit company. You have to make revenue. The business has to sustain so that you get your salary as well. Was it difficult for you to switch from, because doctors have a more altruistic kind of character, like you want to do more for the patient and you don't want to overcharge and stuff like this. Was it difficult to switch?
Good question. And I think that all doctors who come in, especially from practice, right, probably face in the first few days, if not the first few weeks in pharma. And as I said very early on, right, I think this was one of, when I got feedback, the ability to be a bit more focused, right? Now, let me say this at the very onset, that the altruistic area or being patient-centered. In fact, today more and more, I'm probably digressing here to, later on, anything that may be asked, but being patient-centered is extremely important. So I don't think there is really a need to shift the mindset so much. I think it's the ability to think, you put on different hats, all at the same time. Now, first of all, as a doctor, I think it's important for the doctors coming in to understand you're still a doctor, you're still the medical person. If you work in a medical unit, you do not carry sales targets, right? I mean, that's the from a literal sense of things. But yes, because you're speaking for a company and you're speaking for the medicines of the company, your role essentially is to talk about the medicines based on clinical evidence. And I think this in itself you can use to convince doctors as to why this medicine makes sense for their patients. And here, if you hear what I just said, medicines making sense for their patients, right? So I think that fact does not need to get lost when you join a pharmaceutical company, right? It's the ability to say, okay, I'm still a doctor here. I work in the medical side. And in fact, it's not just the medical side. I think this was a message, in my senior years and the company that I used to bring about is the company is involved in research and development and makes medicines that saves patients' lives, right? Or influences patients' lives or treats patients, right? So I think if you have that at the back of your head, then you take on the other elements, right? Of, okay, I'm speaking about medicine X. This is the evidence. Doctor gets convinced, uses the medicines, everything falls in place. Yeah.
Okay. So because there is this okay, when I was still practicing, I would see all these drug reps, and some of them may be medical doctors who have transitioned. I
Right.
mean, at that time, I was still in this very small, sheltered mindset that medicine's all about being the hospital four walls. And when I look at them, I just think that, oh my God, you guys have just betrayed the profession. And a lot of people think that going to pharma is akin to going to the dark side of medicine. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, yeah. So this phrase dark side, yes, I've got it. So let me anecdotally tell you what happened. Two incidences come to mind, right? Now the first thing is when I made the switch to pharma, right? So being a GP and I applying into Pfizer and getting into Pfizer. So once I got the job, my late mom, right? I went to mom and told her that, I'm leaving practice and joining the pharmaceutical industry. And I think I said this before, but she cried, right? My mother literally broke down and cried. And I said, why? My better half, my wife knew about it, right? My wife was cool, but my mom literally broke down, right? And she said, but you're not going to be practicing medicine. What is this you're doing? And I guess the insecurity, right, that comes with it. Obviously, and I was probably one of the first, a few doctors in my family, but I was probably the first one to make the jump. Most of them are either GPs or specialists, but I made the jump. And so the insecurity, the inability to understand. Of course, it was mom and I, sort of sat her down and explained to her and said, this is what I was going to be doing, right? So there was one incident, that shows you, if you're not really aware of what the industry does, right? The second incident that comes to mind is while I was working with a company and we used to do all these, talks for doctors, around the disease and the medicine. So one day I did a talk, somewhere, and I think it was for GPs, and we sat down for lunch together. And one of the GPs sitting next to me, he literally told me, he said, "You're working for the industry now. Haven't you wasted your parents' money, right? For them educating you to be a doctor, and you're now doing this." And again, it sort of took me by surprise because it was like one in a million, right? I never got this question. So again, I had to like literally explain to this doctor about the work that we do. So Selina, actually, I know this this term dark side comes, every now and then, but I think it's an understanding that if not for the pharmaceutical industry, yes, medicines would come, but who's going to do the R&D? Who's going to make that medicines? And then every patient today is on a medicine that most likely has been made by the pharmaceutical industry. Now here, I talk about the originators or whether you're generics, et cetera, right? So to me is getting or grounding yourself on the fact that you are making a difference to the patients out there, whether you're even if you're a doctor who's not practicing, but you're still involved in medicines, in healthcare, and you're making a difference to the patients out there. I think if this mindset is carried, then there's no such thing as the dark side.
Would you say it's quite heavily regulated? There are checks and balance in pharma to ensure that it is not the dark side of medicine.
Yes, definitely. So I think, the clinical studies, right, that are done very rigorously. Okay. And in fact, the first step, right, obviously after they've done the lab work, and some tests, one of the first major steps in a clinical trial for a medicine is to check actually the medicine is safe, right? And that is the most important thing. If a medicine were not safe, right? When I say safe is, see, at the end of the day, whatever medicine you take would have some amount of side effects. And this comes in the brochures. We call it the leaflets, right? Or the package inserts, right? We always talk about the safety of the medicine as well. But trials done ensure that medicines are safe to take. Now, when we talk about being safe, right? I think what we're talking about is the benefit risk. Now, if a medicine was entirely not safe from the very beginning, you probably wouldn't see the light of day, right? So it needs to we need to ensure that the clinical trials tell us this medicine is safe or the safety factor is minimal, right? However, you then go on to do the dosing and the efficacy, right, for the medicine. Now, the efficacy as well, meaning that the medicine works, right, is also very important. So then you do a sort of a benefit risk, right? That medicines are really help. The medicines really help. Yeah, there are some side effects to watch out for, and so long as these side effects do not have life-impacting reactions or the adverse events that affect life in a big way, for which anyway in the very beginning the medicine would have been there, you know. So I think I tend to tell people I used to work for, think of benefit risk. In fact, think of benefit risk in everything that you do, right? We all take risks even in our lives day to day. But having said that, yes, medicines are evaluated for safety. Then the dosing studies are done. Then you look at the efficacy trials, and then they go through the regulatory authorities who, would literally pick up on everything. So by the time a medicine comes out there, it's been through all these rigorous trials, studies, etc. It's been through regulatory approval, right? And everything says is that this medicine is going to benefit the patient, albeit there may be for some patients some side effects, right, which would come up. But we would obviously keep the doctors alerted to this because it's all in the prescription insert. So yes, it's heavily regulated, the industry.
So, how long does it take for a drug to be out there in mass market from the R&D till mass market? How long is that?
So this could vary, Selina. I mean, anywhere between, obviously once a compound is found, it's then patented, right? And patents can go up to anywhere between, I know it's changed now, but from my experience, 15, maybe on average 15 years, right? 15, maybe up to 20 years sometimes. But the patent is gotten before you run through all the clinical trials. And if my knowledge serves me correct, so I mean, again, I've been out of the industry for about 3-4 years now. But if knowledge serves me correctly, by the time we get through all these clinical trials, it could be something like 10 to 12 years, right? Before a medicine actually sees the light of day or is marketed out there, right? So this involves all these clinical trials. So you can see it takes quite a bit of time before a medicine actually comes out and is, can be then used by doctors for their patients. Yeah.
Okay, so what are I mean, you've been in the industry for so long. What are the various roles that are available in the pharmaceutical industries for doctors?
Okay. So I think primarily today for doctors, most pharma companies I notice, and I think a lot of companies are actually taking on medical or medically qualified people. Okay. So, and most of these companies have a function or a department known as medical affairs. So I used to head this department, for many years. So doctors can apply for roles into medical affairs for the different companies when, companies advertise for these roles, right? So that's one role, a role for a doctor in medical affairs. Normally they would be designated as, okay, so we've got this position now, which over the last few years, we're seeing more and more, which is a medical scientific liaison or an MSL for short. Now, what an MSL does, primarily is, they're out there talking to healthcare professionals, giving them the scientific evidence about the medicines, both the disease and the medicines. And they spend a bit more time out on the field, as we say, right? Speaking to the relevant specialists and doctors. So you've got these MSL positions. Then some companies offer positions called medical advisors, right? So medical advisors, again, sort of similar to the MSLs, but maybe spend a bit more time in the office or spend a bit more time internally looking at, strategies for the medicine, scientific evidence, generating more evidence around the medicine. So medical advisors, medical managers, maybe, other areas. So all this sit within the medical affairs function. Some people have asked me, can I be a medical director? No, you just can't be a medical director for a company overnight. You sort of have to come through the, the path, right? The path. So this is for doctors who want to apply. I think this would be your first point, right? trying to get into medical affairs of the pharmaceutical companies. Now, if this is not possible, you could also try getting into the clinical research side. So companies do hire, medically qualified. Obviously, if you have some sort of lab background or research background, makes sense. But you could also get into the clinical research side of a pharma company, right? We may not see much of it nowadays, but it's there, right? And obviously, and I can't speak for the CRO because I worked in a clinical research organization. But just as a tip for the doctors out there, you could try, getting into a CRO or clinical research organization, and then you can always transition back into pharma later on, right? If you feel like it. So I think these are the two primary areas for doctors to get into in pharma, because once you get into pharma, then there are other career options you can take. I've known of doctors, for example, who join marketing, right, and go up the commercial ladder, so as to speak. There's of course also the regulatory function. In fact, in essence, what the regulatory team does is, when it comes to having to register one of our medicines, they get all this information from the parent company, pull together dossiers with regard to the medicine, as I said just now, efficacy, safety data, everything's put together. And then that's, given over to our regulatory agency. I have seen the odd doctor join regulatory, so that's a possibility. But more often than not, I've seen pharmacists, join this function. And maybe one other area that is a possibility is most companies have a pharmacovigilance, or we call it a safety, right, for short, right? As I said earlier, we talk about the safety of medicines. So whenever medicines are out there, and every time there happens to be a report around a side effect that may have happened, right? This gets reported back to the company, and there's a team sitting in the company, or maybe even an individual, who then, has to do the work around ensuring this report is, gotten, is documented, recorded, and then you inform the, your higher up at the regional or global level about this, right? So that's also a possibility. So why I say this, Selina, is I think the natural tendency for doctors out there is, okay, I'm going into medical affairs. But my advice is the medically related functions, as I just mentioned, clinical research, regulatory, pharmacovigilance, are definitely areas to be considered, because it may be an avenue for the doctor to get into the company, right? And learn about a little bit about these areas. And later on, you never know, you could make a transition into medical affairs.
Okay, do any of these roles require APC?
Not to my knowledge, in the days gone by, I've hired doctors who did not have an APC. But let me disclaim that, right? Again, I go back to the point where this is my personal opinion that all doctors, you should do your service and get your full registration with the Malaysian authorities or the Malaysian Medical Council. In fact, just last week, I have a nephew, right, who is doing his housemanship and just became an MO, etc. And this was a point I made to him: ensure that you get your registration. You are registered with the MMC, the Malaysian Medical Council, because you may want to come back to practice in the future, right? And if my understanding serves me correctly, you need that. You need to be registered with the MMC. Now, APC is your annual practicing certificate, right? And that's done. You get that on a yearly basis. Now, to come into pharma, no, we don't need you to have an APC, but so long as you're a qualified doctor, right? But I would really prefer that doctors do their service and then come out, right? I mean, this is me. I know doctors may be out there who may be a little bit frustrated before getting their full registration and really do want to come out. From my time, no, we didn't really, so long as you had your qualifications, right? Now whether you were registered or not, to my time, no, we didn't really look for that. But I used to be very happy if I could get doctors, who are registered. Yeah, I think it's really important, both from a career perspective, as well as if you want to get into pharma. I think it would be really useful to know that you spend that time in hospital, right?
Has that changed much? Like from your time, yeah, APC is not required, but now considering there are so many more doctors that are coming out, a lot of them are seeking alternative options. Would that set someone else apart, having an APC or having a full registration?
To me, yes. I don't know so much about the APC because, if you are very certain you're not going to be practicing, then because we do an APC year on year, right? So obviously, if you're GP, etc., you must have your APC, right? We've not really, at least from my time, we've not really. But I again want to emphasize, to doctors that to me it would make a difference, right? That a doctor actually gets registered, right? Goes through their service, because another point to make is, I think even if you join the industry, what I learned in hospital or my time in hospital, and again, I think my time as a GP, I think this also was a plus point for me when I applied into industry, right? I feel that they did look at the fact that I had this, because practice helps later on, even when you're in the industry, you need to be aware of, the treatment paradigms, the treatment protocols, etc. So that's why, as far as I'm concerned, I think doctors should get registered, do their practice in the hospital, and then you decide at that point in time when you want to, right? Of course, I think some things have changed today, so I'm not highly familiar with that, right? But my take is do those few years in hospital, yeah.
Yeah, but because you've got experience in pharma for over 17 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely a lot of your input would be very helpful for the doctors because you've seen things change and evolve, and you've had leadership roles across Malaysia, Singapore, and China. How did you how did you get there?
Yeah. Okay. So I think most a few pharma companies were, when you apply into them here in Malaysia, they also cover Singapore, right? Now, working Malaysia, working Singapore. Okay. First of all, because you're working for that company, the essentials are the same, right? I mean, if you're talking about the medicines, the disease areas, it doesn't really change. Because if I were to be, if the company were to be marketing medicine X in Malaysia, invariably it markets medicine X in Singapore, right? So the treatment essentials are the same. When you speak to HCPs will be the same. Your approach to the HCPs will essentially be the same. Now, what differs? The differences is probably in the healthcare environment, right? So I guess understanding the healthcare environment, in the other country is important. How does an MOH work there? What's the private sector like? What's the government sector like? How do GPs work there? What's primary care, etc. So I think understanding that environment is important. And I think you can understand that environment. So, for example, when I used to cover Singapore when I first started, I would learn from the teams there, the medical. Sometimes they have a medical team there already, right? So you could learn from them. If not, you learn from your commercial counterparts, from your marketing folk in the other country as to what the situations are. But as I said, the essentials are the same, right? So I didn't have to do much. Again, I guess, some people say doctors' characters are different in different countries. No, not entirely. I think at the end of the day, the doctor still wants to know, what you know about the medicine, the science, the disease, etc. So being able to represent that, whichever country you're in, is pretty similar. Yeah. So I think, Malaysia and Singapore, I think are very similar. So I didn't see, going to Singapore much of a challenge. But you allude to China now, yes. So I think China was for me, a different kettle of fish, as they say, because I was actually on assignment in China for 6 months, working with their medical team there because they needed some reorganization. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is language. Yeah. So when I went there, but thankfully, I had another colleague of mine, also on assignment with me then, and she was a great help to me, right, in being able to translate. Right. That's number one. Number two is culture, right? Working culture, right? Leave alone the culture in the country itself. But I think the working culture, because, you're spending eight hours or more in the office, right? Culture can be different in different countries, right? The way they do their work, how they respond, etc. And not knowing the language made it a bit more difficult. But I think the first step is, again, I emphasize listening, right? I think it's important to listen to understand how they do things. Again, the essentials are the same. Again, Medicine X in Malaysia, Singapore are the same as Medicine X in Pfizer. We use the same literature. The medicine is the same, the dosing. Maybe some nuances, in maybe the medicine is sold in a different dose in a certain country. Maybe you just need to get used to that. And the medicine is the same, right?
Did you have a translator?
I did not have a translator, which is why I had a friend, and she was from Taiwan, so she spoke Mandarin. So initially, but having said that, when I worked in the company, most of them knew English and could understand English. Albeit there were obviously not in the way that we speak, but they could understand. Yeah, so it was not like completely they were speaking in Mandarin. I was trying to understand. No, it was not that. They understood English, they could speak English. It's just that, if I wanted to come up with ideas or on off the cuff, I needed to say something, then obviously I checked with my colleague who was working with me. So, yes, you would need a translator, but no, in our company, they knew English. So it wasn't that much of a, difficulty for me. Yeah.
But now there's a Google Translate, but I guess Google doesn't work in China. So
Yeah. It is not. Yeah, but I think to come back, Selina, I think what was really important for me, when I landed in China was, I think there's a lot of apprehension, right? Because for me, let's put it bluntly, you're not Chinese, right? So as in China Chinese, right? I hope I'm not stepping on any toes and not saying some politically incorrect things here, but Chinese, right? So you've got to gain their trust and confidence, and that's why I said initially it's important to listen, to understand, right? Rather than go sort of headlong into it and say, okay, do this, do that. Because I was actually asked to lead the team, right, for a while. So, you've got to listen, understand, know what the culture is there, know what the environment is there. And the healthcare environment is different in China, right? There are certain things that are done differently, etc. They're also very strict, etc. So you've got to gain that, right? And I guess it worked in the first few weeks because later on they sort of got used to me, sort of knew my style, and it worked. So again, a piece of advice for doctors, once you're in the pharma industry and you want to move up in your career in the pharma industry, one of the roles you can consider is a regional role. Now, for you to want to get into a regional role, more often than not, you have to be mobile. Now, there are some regional roles you can do from your parent country. I've done regional roles based out of Malaysia and then subsequently went on assignment in China. But if you want to do certain regional roles, you may have to go to the country of origin of the company, maybe, or maybe, if you're in Malaysia and they have a regional office in Singapore, you may have to go to Singapore. So this is a piece of advice for those who are already, right, or who have gotten in or get in and then they want to consider their careers. Now, apart from a career within company or within the country, you can think of regional roles, but you need to be mobile more often than.
and then subsequently global, I presume.
You could do global roles. Again, it all depends on how you perform and how you move in the company, etc. And then obviously, they always say, I guess not just pharma, but you need to be visible, yeah, for the right reasons, yeah, for the right reasons, right? Be visible, if you're going for regional meetings, knowing what's happening in your country, being very knowledgeable, having an understanding of the environment, and of course of the HCPs is really important. Yes, then you could always apply into a global role, and there's always that possibility.
So when you say regional, does it mean that I'm a MSL that became an MSL in a regional role, or am I a medical director already and then only I can get a regional role?
So different companies look at this differently. I mean, up to even recently, I saw a position for a regional MSL manager. Now, when we use the word regional, regional can mean many things. Regional can just be Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, right? From some companies' perspective, right? Or it could be Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, right? Now, as an MSL, if a company is looking at maybe you're an MSL who's specialized in a certain area in oncology, and the company decides that, yeah, okay, we want someone to cover Malaysia, Singapore, and even Indonesia, right? So that could be, like I say, it's all semantics lah. Sometimes, when we talk about the region, but no, you could be an MSL in a company handling, or a medical advisor in a company looking at, two or three different companies, because today there's also this element in pharma of clustering countries, right? As part of the way the company works, right? So you could come in as an MSL or a medical advisor and not just be for Malaysia and Singapore. You could be Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Indonesia, Thailand, right? And then you would have to look after that portfolio for these different companies, because maybe they want, strong focus, and you are recognized as a strong person. So no, and medical directors, conversely, would just be for a country, right? Regional medical director positions are there. As I mentioned just now, you could be a regional medical director for a certain portfolio covering some countries in Asia. So yeah, that's how it works, basically.
Okay, so I have a couple of doctors, like some of them are just fresh out of maybe housemanship or just completed their compulsory service and got their license and they apply for medical director roles.
Mm.
So how does, obviously, I saw that look on your face. So how does one become a medical director? Can you apply, can you get a job as a medical director fresh out of practice?
Not to my knowledge, not that I've heard of. I could be missing something, but no. It's a career path, right? So entry level into most, if not all, pharma companies are either at MSL level or maybe at a medical advisor level, because being a medical director is you're a manager of a team. So you need to be able to manage a team. Number one. Number two is you become an administrator as well, right? And if you've never done administration, it just doesn't work. And administering in one company differs from another company. So it's not just the medical work. So when you come in, you first need to get grounded in, the medicines that the company markets, right? The science behind it. I'm just talking about medical, the science behind it, the external environment, the HCPs. You need to know all these things, and then the different elements, right? Like I spoke about regulatory. You need to be versed in regulatory, pharmaco. So you need to have a good understanding cross, right? And then of course the external communications, etc. So once you have do that, so normally I would tell a person. So I was in a company for 17 years, right? But there are people who move, right? But I tell people, if you want to move also within the industry, please spend at least 2 to 3 years in one company, right? Understanding it. The basics will always be generally the same if you're in medical affairs in most companies, right? It's just understanding the different medicines and the different disease areas if you move. But the basics will always be the same, right? In the way you work internally, the way you work externally. But you've got to start at an MSL or medical advisor level, unless I don't know of anyone who's sort of jumped in, right? Because the industry is obviously it's a different industry. The work we do is different, right? From you being a practicing doctor, whether it be in hospital or even as a GP. Yeah,
Just like you mentioned, you would advise them to stay at least 2 years in a company. Why?
I think that it. You see, whenever if you were say 6 months, you switch somewhere else. I think that's disrupting your learning process. See, it all begins with the fact that how serious are you about being in the industry for a long term? Right? Is this what you want to do for the long term? Right? Yes, I know it's difficult to say because some people move into the industry and say, hey, it's not for me, right? But you have to, at least most of you who want to get into the industry should say, okay, I'm in it for, okay, let's just say not even for the long haul, but for the midterm, right? What's midterm? Maybe 4 years, 5 years. I want to stick around to see how this works. Now, if you're going to do that and you think that the pharma is for you, then I think you should stay in one place to learn, right? 6 months not good enough. 1 year also, again, to me, it's arbitrary, right? Some people may say 3 to 4 years, right? But to me, it's to learn the basics of the industry in the medical side. As we said, there are different elements to the medical side, learning about the science, how you do the science, clinical papers, a whole lot of things. This takes time. Understanding how regulatory works, understanding pharmacovigilance, understanding clinical research. If you get all of this, and if it's done within 2 to 3 years, and you have these basics, then you move on. And then again, if you move on to another company, obviously the company is going to say, okay, can you tell me about this, right? Now, if you've been there just for 3, 4 months, how much can you talk, right? So you need to be around to gather all of this and then decide, okay, maybe I want to move on, right? So yeah, I think it is very disruptive. No pun intended there. But for 2 to 3 years, be in one company, learn the basics, and then you recalibrate, right? It's at some point, right? Or you reflect. Yeah.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, and I know it's something at the top of everyone's mind. What is the salary earning potential of someone who gets into pharma?
It's a bit difficult to answer that question. It's good enough, lah, for you to
Like a
be.
ballpark figure, because I think this is, I mean, when somebody decides that, okay, I'm going to get into this field or that field, salary and earning potential is like at the top of their mind.
Yeah.
So what would a ballpark figure look like?
Yeah, I honestly can't give you a ballpark figure, but I think that, what I found from my time, right? Obviously, this is many years ago. What I would earn in pharma was better than what I was earning in hospital, right? Okay. I think maybe double, what I was earning in hospital. Now, I know in the hospital today, based on what I hear, things have improved, right? Starting salaries are obviously much better. I'm talking about 20 years ago. But certainly, if I were to do some sort of, comparison, yes, I would think it obviously is better than what you would earn in hospital setting. However, maybe if you're working in a GP setting, right, with a group, etc., which I think is also much better, it may be comparable, right? It may be comparable. If you're working in private healthcare or in a private setting, be it in a private hospital, in as an MO or in the A&E, or even as a GP in a group, right? Again, if you're in a GP practice, then obviously I think if you start a practice, you're not going to be leaving it in a hurry, right? So, but this is more if you're employed, right? So the way I would see it, because honestly, figures have changed, right? But I think hospital practice, you probably would do better if you're going to join pharma. Even private side, be it hospital or in a GP group, it may be comparable, right? It may be comparable. That's basically my point of view.
Okay, how do you see yourself impacting healthcare differently?
Yeah. So today, after having been in industry close to 20 years, I work with a company as a medical as well as a healthcare consultant, right? Why I chose to be, to do this now is, okay, there's flexibility. As the hair shows you, I'm sort of peri-retired, or they call it, right? Around a retirement age. However, I think the first thing is I'm very keen to give back, right, in terms of my learnings and my experience, which is why, we are looking at trainings for medical affairs, right, for the company I work with. And for me to be able to, share my experiences as I've done on this podcast, and I can do more, through some form of training programs for the medical group, especially, right? And of course, overall for the industry. So that's one thing, learning and development. Definitely, as I said, communication is a passion of mine. And I would like now to share and sort of, look back on some of these doctors who would like to come into industry, and teach and maybe even train them. Yeah. So that's one reason, right? And that's impacting the pharmaceutical side, right? Now, in terms of overall healthcare, I think one of the areas, I've worked in before is non-communicable disease, right? NCDs. And NCDs in Malaysia, right, are a problem, right? We see this in the National Health Mobility Survey that was recently released and is being released, that, diabetes and hypertension and cholesterol still creating issues for, the public out there. We're getting more and more patients, etc. For example, 1 in 5, I believe, for diabetes, etc. So how can I impact healthcare? So currently working with this group, we're looking at some projects, right? And I personally look at some projects probably tailored around if we could partner, right, with some parts of the healthcare sector, around projects on NCDs, right? I hope to be able to contribute that way, in helping patients out there, right? Both treating as well as prevention, right? I think is important. So I think that's how I hope to impact healthcare, albeit, with my ideas individually, but through the company I currently work for. So both pharma as well as healthcare.
Okay, what's your final advice for doctors who are thinking of getting into pharma?
Okay, I think it goes back to all that I said earlier, right? It is definitely an interesting area. It is competitive, so let's not hide that fact. But it is definitely interesting, and for me, no regrets. 20 years in pharma, so I think that should tell you that it is very interesting. It's very rewarding in its own way. Not just I know everyone when I say rewarding think of compensation, but rewarding from a patient perspective, because more and more today, we are understanding patients' needs, and I think pharma is responding to patients' needs. So do not worry about the fact that you're being pulled away from practice and therefore you don't impact patients. No. So it's an interesting career, definitely something that can be thought of for long term. It is competitive, but if you're going to go into pharma, really ready yourself, right? It's really important to be ready to understand the industry, to know the company before you actually make that move of applying. And, I know it begins with a CV, but I think, put in all that's relevant there. Anything, I always ask them, if you've done any form of research, any project, put that into your CV. I mean, to cap it off, Selina, it's definitely an interesting industry. I would definitely recommend it for doctors out there. It's a bit competitive to get in today, but, don't lose hope. Keep trying, yeah? Okay? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vicknesh, and thank you all. That wraps up another episode of Postcall. Now, if you're considering exploring a new career path, remember to check out our non-clinical Pathfinder workshop on Disruptive Doctors platform, and also do come for our annual conference that happens every August, where doctors are impacting healthcare differently, and you get to connect to like-minded doctors such as Dr. Vicknesh. And until then, take care and keep disrupting the norm.
Join Disruptive Doctors. Oh, Disruptive Doctors. Impact.